thanks for coming. I will be quick, maybe 10 minutes. So we're going to talk about some of the hard numbers that we collect from two sources. The first source is our Issues Monitor, which, as some of you know, we ask 1,000 Australians a month to select the top 3 issues that they believe are facing the nation at that time from a list of 19. So they're only allowed to select 3. It's a measure of relative importance. We also ask them to select the top 3 issues facing their state and their local area. So we'll draw from some of that. We'll also draw on a global study that we run called Global Advisor, which is a 1,000 a month survey of 24 countries. Okay, so as we stand right now, the most important issue facing the nation is cost of living, with 4 out of 10 people, 4 out of 10 Australians selecting as one of the top 3 issues facing the nation. Interestingly, healthcare and hospitals is number 2. It's most important for people over 50, so representing about 40% of the 18 plus population. It's the most important issue, but it's slipped back to number 2. And we've actually gone through a period of transition over the last 2 years. So when we first started the survey in 2010, 1 out of every 2 people were selecting healthcare and hospitals as the top issue. And we've seen that come back over the course of the last couple of years. So as you can see there, in November 2011, we had a significant increase in concern around cost of living, and a significant increase again around concern of cost of living for the next 12 months. We've also seen that the economy actually touches people in different ways. So concerns around the economy manifest themselves in concerns around cost of living, more recently unemployment, and also the macro economy itself. We find that younger Australians being kind of sub 50 are concerned about cost of living, that economic engine room, that 40 to 60 concerned around the economy, and then as you get older, as you get 50 plus, the macro economy seems to be the concern. So this first chart here is its time series, looking at the transition. So as you can see, in November 2010, the concern around healthcare and hospitals was a clear leader, so 1 out of every 2, and then it's come back, and it's actually now kind of probably, they were single, and I guess now they're married. So inflation and cost of living and healthcare and hospitals continue to jockey for first and second position every month as we run through. In order for us to kind of understand how the economy manifests itself over time, we've created this thing called the economic triangle of doom, which means that if you in the survey you select one of our 3 key economic measures, so be it inflation, cost of living, and or the economy and or unemployment, you get classified into this doom category, where we had 1 out of every 2 people at the start of the survey selecting one of these economic issues, and now we've got 2 out of every 3 people selecting one of these economic issues as we go along. Okay, now we're just going to talk briefly about the carbon tax, and we looked at the data, and we looked at when it started to jump in concern around inflation, cost of living. It was quite low. We had just over a quarter of people saying inflation, cost of living was a concern, and then once the price on carbon, without any actual kind of information around it, was flagged, we actually saw a spike. It jumped about 10% over the course of 2 months, and then things they didn't chill out as such, but they stayed fairly stable. Concern dropped off a little bit, and then as the lead up to the carbon tax being introduced, there were people contacting the Competition Commission saying that they've already been charged by the carbon tax, and so there's all this fear around it. Then as soon as the carbon tax comes in, Whyalla didn't disintegrate, nothing really happened, and so concerns dropped off. But as Rebecca was saying, it's always there, and so we've seen it kind of come up again over the last couple of months. It speaks to the more broader concern. So what we're looking at here is our economic confidence measure. So we've seen that we've dropped from about 74% confidence in November 2010, and it really, over that first half of 2011, we saw it drop right down, and then it's kind of stayed stable and dropped again at around 61% at the moment, saying that our economic situation is good. In saying that, and as Rebecca touched on it, it's all about relativity. So even though Australians, 61% of us are saying that our economy is good, and when you compare that back to a couple of years ago, that's really, really bad. When we look at our friends in the UK and our friends in the US, we really don't have that much to complain about. And that's certainly a line that we've been getting from our government, our federal government, where they're talking about how well we're doing relative to everybody else. But as you can see, Australians are not necessarily, they may believe that, but they're not necessarily seeing that day to day. One thing that we find particularly interesting is that our economic confidence tracks pretty much in line with China's. And so China represents 29% of our export market, and as you can see, these are two kind of random samples of the general public every month, and we see that our confidence pretty much drops in line with China's. But in saying that, the Chinese are our biggest customer, and there was a number of reports that come out, one of which came out on the weekend that showed that 8 out of the 10 most prosperous cities over the last year are based in China. Macau at the top, and then as you go down from there, Perth was the second most prosperous, and then at the other end, the bottom 5 are from the kind of the old world economies. So we're looking at 9 of the 10 least prosperous cities over the last year from Europe. So we all know this, but there are a number of reports that come out about it. And so the government's response, well, we didn't see that much of a move on interest rates in 2011. What we have seen though is that they just yesterday or the day before they dropped to the lowest rate since the GFC times. What we haven't seen though is interest rates dropped in the last GFC, that property prices, particularly around Melbourne, really kicked up, and we're not seeing that here. We're seeing a lot of positive talk. We're not seeing that here. The Treasurer sold this as a positive. This change as a positive, and good work by the government. And the RBA came out today, or a representative from the RBA came out today and said, look, we need to get used to this idea that low interest rates are relatively normal for the foreseeable future. One stat that we collect and we think is interesting is that at the point where Australia, or using Melbourne as an example, became less competitive as a destination, a long-term destination for skilled migrants from established economies. What we're looking at here is that if you were to sell an average house in England, what number of average houses you could buy in Melbourne for that price. And we see pretty much from the start of time, you're always getting a better deal. So if you were to move from England in, say, 2006, you'd be able to buy 1.3 average houses in Melbourne, and then when the GFC hit, the property prices here went up, our dollar became more competitive. And what we're seeing is you're not actually going to increase your standard of living. If you're, say, a middle-aged person wanting to move the family out here, you may increase your job prospects in long term, but you may take a hit on the type of house that you live in. So if you sell an average house in the UK today, or in England today, sorry, you can buy 0.7 of an average house in Melbourne, which equates to about 400 grand, and so you can buy an average house in one of those suburbs in Melbourne. Okay, so broadly, as we all know, economic concerns are more acute, conversations are more complex, and there's more competition for the share of the voice in terms of from a media perspective. Our government, interestingly, has promoted that austerity model. Sorry, not the opposite. Our government has promoted a stimulus model, whereas a lot of the European economies have promoted an austerity model, and that our customers, everyone recognises they're the strongest in the world, but they're weakening, and we've seen what's happened in Europe, and we're concerned it's going to come to us. Okay, so Victoria, we're going to talk about similar things, but more specifically, the top issues, when we ask people the top issues facing Victoria, that they are primarily around service delivery, and service delivery that is a responsibility of the government, the Victorian government. So healthcare and hospitals is still a clear winner, followed by inflation, cost of living, issues, the kind of interlinked issues of crime and transport, and then education. Education's risen over the short term. Okay, so Victoria here on this chart are the blue thick line, and everyone else is the grey dotted line. We can see it's healthcare and hospitals is important. It's kind of gone along that similar trend where it's important, but it's not as important as it was. It's still the most important issue for everyone over 50 though, not at all important for younger people. Kind of opposite of that, the next slide here, we're looking at inflation, cost of living, which is incredibly important for younger people, and it's the second most important issue for Victorians aged 18 to 29. The most important issue by a mile is price of housing and housing. We're seeing over 45% of young people saying that that's a concern. They're not just talking about buying a house, they're talking about renting a house as well. Okay, now crime's an interesting one. Concerns around crime were incredibly acute in around November 2010, around the election time. It's been said that the election was won on law and order and transport issues, and the PSOs, where they issue linked the issues around transport and crime, seemed to be a bit of a winner. We had a number of other things happen that promoted crime as a concern in Victoria. So we had a particularly some real issues around violence against international students, particularly Indian students, and we had protests from Indian students. We also had the implementation of the smartphone around November 2010, where the smartphone penetration really increased. Beyond that, we've not only got the opportunity to consume more information, we've also got the opportunity to produce more information. And so, as you can see, those two fellows on the right-hand side may be familiar faces. They were caught recently on a rail replacement bus in Frankston, having a go. Quite ugly words with a young French lady on a bus, and so that's been seen all around the world. And so much so that the concerns around crime, or the appetite for crime, is such that the Herald Sun's actually got one of their big drivers to get people behind the paywall for their website is a huge amount of information around true crime. So there's a real appetite. In saying that, the concern around it has dropped a little bit, and the balance of Australians have caught up. Okay, now this is the one issue: public transport infrastructure, where Victoria is really different from everywhere else. So we look at Victoria versus the rest of Australia on this, and we see roughly about a 10% difference in concern. We look at it and we say, well, what else is different about Victoria? We're a more urban state. 3/4 of 18-plus-year-olds live in Melbourne, relative to 25% from regional and rural Victoria. We also see that it's always constantly being spoken about, and we're at a point now where there's conversations about whether we do go for the big road tunnel or whether we do go for the rail tunnel. The one constant is that it's there, and that conversation about road or rail always seems to be an all conversation. It's not necessarily an and conversation, particularly with the large things. We haven't really seen this drop too much. We see it fluctuate a little bit, but for the most part, we're always more interested in transport than the balance of the states. One area we have seen rise, though, which is of concern, are these schools that have been closing over the last little while have really increased concern around education. And what that means for us, I think it comes to that idea that the school is necessarily a public institution, and if we're seeing public institutions closing, even though they might be privately run colleges, we have seen the schools become more acute, or the concern become more acute. Unemployment is an issue, particularly as Roger was saying during the video. We are a manufacturing hub, and when we're seeing big companies, big robust companies that are still selling more cars, actually deciding to move their jobs offshore, or to realise some efficiencies, like Ford and Toyota dropping combined 750 jobs. It's very visual. We had a big cluster of layoffs around April that we think are driving that. And these are big companies. What we're going to look at next, though, is unemployment. We can't underestimate the impact that the job cuts within the public sector have on our public sentiment towards feelings of job security. What we're looking at here is the blue line, where Premier Baillieu announced 3,500 cuts in, I think, December 2010, and then it was kind of spoken of ongoing. I think he announced the specifics in June 2012. Premier Newman from Queensland, who was elected, I think, in April this year or March this year, came out and initially announced 20,000 jobs would go from the public sector, and he revised that down to 15,000. But what we see is that the concern there has jumped by almost 15% in 1 month. So it's the most important issue facing Queensland at the moment is unemployment, concerns around unemployment. Okay, so they're the top issues facing Victoria. So in summary, we're an urban state. We've got more urban issues relative to the balance of Australia, or relative particularly from the balance of the East Coast. Concerns around education are more acute. We're being told we're transitioning into a knowledge economy, but it's really hard to visualise a knowledge economy, particularly when you're seeing these massive kind of clusters of manufacturing jobs go. I think Michael touched on it, that the young people can't replicate what their parents had in terms of housing, and there's a recognition there, but there's a concern, a fear for the future. And then I think that we're only 2 years into a government term, so there's a number of pre-election promises that have had to go. We've had cuts, we've got a AAA credit rating, relative silence on progress, but there's just a thirst to actually get some things happening out there, particularly in the transport space. So thank you, and have a Merry Christmas.